AOC tried to embarrass Kennedy on live TV with one smug insult, but seconds later his calm reply flipped the entire room. What started as a jab turned into a turning point, and by the end it wasn't him who looked humiliated, it was her stay until the end to see the moment everything changed. The Senate hearing room was packed, standing room only a dozen camera crews lined the back wall, their lenses trained on the main table, where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator John Kennedy sat opposite each other. This wasn't just a policy hearing anymore. It was the showdown everyone had been waiting for. The topic was energy transition. How the U.S. should handle the shift from fossil fuels to renewable sources. AOC had made it clear in her opening remarks this was a moral emergency. Climate change was not a distant threat. It was here now. And Washington's delay was, in her words, legislative cowardice. She cited rising sea levels, hurricanes battering the coast, and heat waves killing the poor. Her voice was sharp, her tone unapologetic, and the crowd, especially the younger aides and activists in the back, nodded along. Then it was Kennedy's turn. He adjusted his glasses, glanced briefly at his notes, and spoke slowly, deliberately. His opening statement was less fiery, more grounded. "We all want a cleaner future," he began. "But let's not bulldoze the present on our way to it." He talked about coal miners and Kentucky oil workers in Louisiana, truck drivers hauling gasoline across states. What happens to them? He asked, do they just become a footnote in someone else's green dream? There was no applause, but there were murmurs as some heads nodded, others frowned. Oak leaned back, arms crossed. When her microphone turned green again, she didn't wait. "So let me get this straight," she said. "You want to slow down progress because some oil executives might have to downgrade?" There are yachts that got a reaction, laughter, a few claps, and even some raised eyebrows from the press section. Kennedy didn't blink. "I'm talking about workers," he replied. "Mothers and fathers trying to put food on the table, folks who don't get invited to the climate galas." The back and forth continued for another 20 minutes. AOC cited a study from Stanford. Kennedy brought up real stories from his constituents. She emphasized urgency. He emphasized caution. Neither gave an inch. But then came the moment no one expected. AOC, clearly frustrated, leaned forward and said it. "Sit down, boy. We're done entertaining fossil fuel puppets." The room froze. It wasn't just the insult. It was who she said it to. Kennedy sat still, hands folded, the camera zoomed. In Twitter lit up. Some laughed, some cringed, others held their breath. Kennedy paused, then slowly he leaned forward toward his mic. "Yes." What he said next changed everything. Kennedy leaned into the microphone with the same calm he'd carried throughout the hearing. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't flinch. He just looked at AOC with the kind of composure that comes from years of public service and said, "Well, ma'am, I may be from the South and I may speak a little slower than you're used to, but don't confuse that with stupidity. My mama taught me to respect women even when they forget to return the favor." The ripple that passed through the room wasn't noise, it was silence. A kind of stunned quiet where no one knew whether to clap, tweet, or just stare. AOC's smile faltered for half a second. She wasn't used to being challenged like this. Not with restraint, not without yelling. Kennedy didn't gloat. He didn't throw the insult back. He reframed it. He made it about values. And in doing so, he shifted the tone of the room. He went on. "I represent thousands of families whose livelihoods depend on industries your policies would shut down overnight. I don't come here with graphs from Stanford. I come here with names, phone numbers, and stories that don't fit in a bullet point list." He pulled a folded letter from his inside pocket. No theatrics. Just a man reading a note from a constituent, a single father from Lafayette, who'd worked in offshore drilling for 15 years, laid off 2 months ago. Couldn't afford rent, didn't qualify for green job training because the program hadn't started yet. "He asked me one question," Kennedy continued. "Do they want to save the planet or just replace the people on it?" For a second, it wasn't about AOC anymore. It was about that question. AOC shifted in her seat. Her expression didn't change, but her posture did. Subtle but noticeable, less forward, less dominant. She cleared her throat and responded, "Of course. We care about people. That's the whole point. Climate justice is economic justice. We can build a future where no one is left behind." But Kennedy didn't let it drop. "Then stop talking like everyone who disagrees with you is a villain. You want unity? Start acting like it's somewhere in the crowd." Someone clapped just once, then a few more, not loud, not organized, but it was there. Reporters scribbled. Camera operators whispered social media was already editing the clip into sound bites. The dynamic had shifted. AOC wasn't the only force in the room anymore, and Kennedy. He wasn't just holding his ground, he was shaping the ground beneath them both. But the real shift was still coming, because while AOC had tried to win the room with fire, Kennedy was about to steal it with something far more. Dangerous questions she couldn't answer, Kennedy gave the room a moment to breathe before continuing. His voice remained calm, almost too calm, for how hard his next question would land. "Let me ask you something," said, eyes steady on AOC. "You've promised millions of green jobs. Solar techs, wind engineers, clean infrastructure builders, where exactly? Are those jobs today? Not on paper, not in theory right now? Where are they?" AOC straightened. She looked down briefly, gathering her response. "We've secured major federal investments. Through the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill he cut. In gently but firmly, that's funding, not jobs, not yet. People can't eat projections." The room stilled again. She opened her mouth to respond, but he kept going, not with accusation, but with precision. "I've read the promises. 10 million new jobs, retraining programs, economic justice sounds good, but here's what. I don't see Timet's transition plans. What happens to a 58-year-old welder in West Texas who gets laid off tomorrow? Who trains him? How long does that take? Who pays his mortgage next month?" She started to respond, but the questions kept coming. "You said earlier that we're in a moral emergency. I don't disagree, but when did we decide that?" Urgency meant steamrolling people's lives without a blueprint now. The hearing didn't feel like a debate. It felt like a reckoning. Even AOC's allies were listening more than reacting. Finally, she answered, "We are building that blueprint now. We've spent decades ignoring this problem. And yes, some transitions will be hard, but they're necessary." Kennedy nodded slowly, almost respectfully. "I'm not saying do nothing," he said. "I'm saying plan better, respect the people caught in the middle, and maybe, just maybe, don't call them boy when they asked you how." AOC paused. There was no smirk. This time she glanced at the notepad in front of her, then set it aside. The moderator spoke up for the first time in a while, inviting the next senator to speak, but the tension hadn't lifted. If anything, it had deepened. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. Quiet now. He wasn't there to score points. He'd made his, but the internet wasn't done. Clips were already going viral. The boy insult was trending, but so was Kennedy's comeback, and more importantly, so were his questions, the ones AOC hadn't fully answered, and that's when the regret started to show, not in an apology AOC never offered one, but in the way she shifted her focus for the rest of the hearing. No more personal jabs, no more quips, just facts, figures, and effort, because whether she admitted it or not, the moment had turned. But Kennedy wasn't finished. Not yet. He still had one more card to play. One that would take the debate beyond energy and straight into the heart of how Washington treats the working class. Kennedy adjusted the microphone again, this time with a slower motion. He wasn't in a rush. The room was listening now, not out of politeness, but out of curiosity. Something had shifted. "I want to share something I wasn't planning to read today," he said, pulling another piece of paper from his folder. This one looked worn, folded twice, the edges soft. "This is from a woman named Gloria. She's a cafeteria worker at a public school in Lake Charles. Her husband lost his job at the local refinery last year. She's been working double shifts since." He looked at AOC briefly, then read aloud. "We were told my husband would be eligible for retraining, but the nearest program is 3 hours away. And we don't have a second car, they said. Everything's going green, but we're drowning in red." He folded the paper and set it down gently. "Gloria is not a lobbyist. She doesn't have a PAC. She didn't write this letter for drama. She wrote it because she wanted to know if anyone in this room even remembers she exists." A hush followed. 1-8 in the back tapped something quickly on a phone. It was probably already on. Twitter, Kennedy went on. "We keep talking about emissions and goals and the future, which I support. But if we don't figure out how to carry people like Gloria through this transition, what are we really building? A cleaner future, sure, but at what cost?" AOC didn't interrupt. She folded her arms, nodding slightly, not mockingly. Almost like she understood what he was doing. He looked across the panel, not just at her. "We have the power to do this right, not fast right. And if we get it wrong, it won't be the climate that turns against us. It'll be the people this time." No one clapped, no one booed the room. didn't react at all. It just sat in that moment. Then AOC leaned forward, Senator Kennedy. She said, voice softer, "You're right that we need better planning, and yes, some of these programs are too slow, or too confusing for the people who need them most, but we also can't afford to wait until the perfect plan shows up the planet." "Won't wait," Kennedy nodded. "Then let's meet in the middle. Let's move fast, but let's stop pretending that speed and care are mutually exclusive." AOC tilted her head, a faint smile breaking through, not mockery, something else, a sign that the wall was cracking. This wasn't a surrender from either of them, it was a shift. And yet even now, no one watching had realized what Kennedy was really doing, because everything up to this point, every letter, every question, was just groundwork. The real moment that would flip the narrative upside down was still one answer away. By now, the hearing felt less like a clash and more like a pivot point. Both sides had landed hits, but neither had fully claimed the ground. And that's exactly what Kennedy was counting on. He leaned forward, once more, his tone steady, but now carrying something new intention. "I have one final question," he said, not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but for the record. He looked directly at AOC. "In your Green New Deal proposal, there's a clause section for outlining economic support for displaced workers, but nowhere in that section is there a binding commitment on funding the phrase where appropriate and feasible. My question is simple. Who decides what's appropriate? Who decides what's feasible?" He let the words hang. Oak blinked, momentarily caught off guard, not by the question itself, but by the detail. Most never read the fine print he had. She answered carefully. The legislative process would determine that through budgeting and implementation. He raised his hand slightly, not to interrupt, just to narrow the focus. "So what you're saying is Congress decides, which means it's not guaranteed, it's optional." AOC hesitated. "It's part of a broader commitment to support those in transition, but not a promise." He said, "Not yet." That's when the room understood what he had done. Every story he'd shared, every letter he read, every name, every question, it was all leading here to that one phrase buried deep in the policy. Kennedy wasn't fighting climate action. He was exposing the risk of trusting words without guarantees. He continued, "You can have the best intentions in the world, but if the people you're trying to help don't see it in writing, if they don't see funding, timelines, enforcement, then it's just another politician's dream written on someone else's mortgage." There were no loud reactions, no outbursts, just silence. AOC sat back for a moment. She looked genuinely conflicted, not about her beliefs, but about the gap Kennedy had pointed out, because the truth was he hadn't attacked the Green New Deal. He challenged the part. No one wanted to talk about the uncertainty between ideas and implementation, and in doing so he'd shifted the narrative again, the insult from earlier. The viral moment, the soundbite, was fading into something more complicated. It wasn't about who won the exchange anymore. It was about who asked the better question. Kennedy looked down at his notes one last time, then back at AOC. "Maybe next time," he said quietly, "instead of calling someone boy, ask him what he's reading." AOC gave a faint smile, not defensive, not dismissive. It looked almost like acknowledgement, because Kennedy had made his point, but what no one realized, not yet, was that the true twist of the day wouldn't come from the debate. It would come from what happened after, when the media picked it apart, when the parties reacted, when Kennedy did something no one expected from him. That's where we're headed next. The hearing ended without fireworks, no shouting, no walkouts, just a quiet gavel tap and a slow shuffling of papers, but the silence carried weight. Everyone in the room knew something had shifted, even if they couldn't quite name it yet. Outside, reporters crowded the hallway, waiting for a soundbite. Oak walked past them quickly, eyes forward, jaw tight. She didn't speak to the cameras. Not yet. Kennedy followed. A few minutes later, no entourage, no smile, just that same quiet confidence he'd held throughout. A few reporters called his name. He stopped, turned, and gave them exactly one lineo. "Don't have to shout to be heard." Then he kept walking, but online, the shouting had already started. Clips flooded social media. Some zoomed in on AOC's sit-down boy moment, others replayed Kennedy's calm response on loop. Political commentators rushed to pick sides. Progressives defended AOC's passion, conservatives hailed Kennedy's restraint, but beneath the noise something else was happening. People were replaying his questions, not his insults. Not his posture, his questions. What's the timeline for retraining? Who funds it? What happens in the meantime? And for once, it wasn't just political junkies asking. It was steelworkers, truckers, teachers, even students. Anyone whose future was being reshaped by policies written far from where they lived. That night, a segment aired on a major network, not a partisan. Just a basic news recap. It played AOC's remarks then. Kennedy's no commentary, no spin, just the facts, and the reactions were telling. A caller from Pennsylvania said, "I support the environment, but that man asked what we're all thinking, who's going to help us in between?" Another woman from Arizona, "She's smart, but he made it real." Even a few climate activists on social media admitted reluctantly that Kennedy's points about implementation gaps weren't wrong. One viral post read, "We need more plans that work for everyone." Kennedy made me uncomfortable, and that's probably a good thing by morning. Kennedy's office had received hundreds of emails, some angry, but many appreciative, not for attacking the Green New Deal, but for humanizing the debate, for refusing to turn workers into political collateral. But Kennedy didn't tweet, he didn't release a video, he didn't gloat. He let the moment breathe. Meanwhile, AOC was meeting with her staff, already planning a response, a follow-up statement, a clarification, maybe a tweet thread, something to steer the narrative back into her lane. But deep down she knew the damage wasn't in what she said, it was in what she couldn't answer, because the real story wasn't about who won a single moment, it was about who asked the questions that wouldn't go away. And Kennedy, he was about to double down, but not in the way anyone expected. The next morning, Kennedy arrived at the Capitol without cameras trailing him. No press conference, no sound crew, just a briefcase under his arm and a handwritten note in his pocket. By midday, something unusual hit the congressional docket, a bipartisan amendment proposal drafted by Kennedy, co-sponsored by 2 Democrats. It wasn't sweeping, it wasn't flashy, but it was strategic. The amendment proposed specific language to revise funding commitments in Section 4B of the Green New Deal related legislation. No more "where appropriate and feasible." The new phrasing was clear. Shall provide direct funding for displaced energy sector workers. Within 6 months of industry phase-out, reporters barely noticed it at first. It didn't have the buzz of a viral video or the heat of a televised insult, but within hours, policy analysts started to take interest. This wasn't just Kennedy pushing back. It was Kennedy offering something tangible. A line in the sand that said, if we're serious about transition, let's make sure it doesn't leave people behind. On social media, the narrative began to shift again. Headlines popped up. Kennedy proposes safety net fix for green legislation, from soundbite to substance. Kennedy follows up with policy. AOC Kennedy clash sparks actual legislative change. That last one caught AOC's attention. She had been drafting a video response addressing the backlash, defending her position, reframing the insult as a moment of justified frustration. But now the conversation had moved. Kennedy wasn't dwelling on what she said, he was building off it. And it was working. Her staff debated next steps. Some wanted to reject the amendment outright, call it a distraction. Others advised a different route. Sponsor it, own it, show unity. AOC hesitated, then something unexpected happened. Kennedy sent her a handwritten note, just 2 sentences. "We may disagree on a lot, but we both know half measures won't cut it. Let's do this one right." No signature, just his. Senate office letterhead, old school. She read it twice, then placed it down slowly. Her staff waited for her reaction. "We'll respond," she said, but her tone wasn't defiant. It was measured, careful. That afternoon, she walked out of her office, addressed a small group of reporters, and said, simply, "Senator Kennedy and I come from different worlds, but the people we serve deserve answers, not slogans. I'm reviewing the amendment because, politics aside, he asked the right question." The cameras rolled, the headlines followed. It wasn't a truce, it wasn't unity, but it was rare, too ideological. Opposites giving just enough ground to move the debate forward behind closed doors. Kennedy smiled faintly as his aide read the quote aloud. It wasn't about winning the argument anymore, it was about changing the argument altogether. But what came next would test everything, because someone else was about to enter the picture, and their reaction, it would decide how long this moment of cooperation could last. The cooperation between Kennedy and AOC didn't go unnoticed, especially not by their respective parties within 24 hours. Both offices were fielding quiet phone calls from party leadership. For Kennedy, it came from a senior committee chair. The tone was firm, not hostile. "You're getting attention," the voice said. "Just make sure you remember who's watching." Kennedy didn't respond right away. He knew what the message meant. Crossing the aisle was fine in theory, but doing it publicly and on this issue. Raised eyebrows, he kept it brief. If they want to watch, let them on AOC's side. The pressure was different. A closed-door meeting with a few progressive colleagues turned tense. "You're legitimizing his position." One of them said, "He's using your platform to look bipartisan." But AOC wasn't buying it. He didn't mock the Green New Deal, she replied. He found a flaw and offered a fix. "If I can't admit that, what are we even doing here?" The room went quiet. Later that day, she did something unexpected. She walked into Kennedy's office without cameras, without staff, just a legal pad in hand. He looked up a little surprised, but not unsettled. She sat across from him. "Let's tighten the language." She set it a deadline for state implementation, not just federal funding. "If we're going to do this, let's do it like it matters." Kennedy leaned back, studying her. This wasn't posturing. This was work for the next hour. They went clause by clause, not always agreeing, but always negotiating. No grandstanding, just two lawmakers doing what voters always say they want, collaborating. Outside, the media spun their own story. Some called it political theater, others saw a shift in tone and new president. But inside that office, none of that mattered. They were rewriting something that had already been introduced that meant rules, timelines. Committee reviews, it would take time. It might fail, but it was real. Later that night, Kennedy sat with his team reviewing the latest draft. One aide asked the question hanging over everything. "Do you think she's doing this to score points?" Kennedy looked up slowly. "She's doing it because the old way isn't working anymore." Meanwhile, AOC's staff asked her something similar. "Are you worried this makes you look weak?" She shook her head. "If fixing a policy makes me look weak, maybe we've been measuring strength the wrong way." Word of their joint efforts started spreading quietly through Congress. Some were skeptical, others intrigued, but one senator, powerful, old school, a gatekeeper on environmental committees, was not pleased. He called Kennedy the next morning. "No pleasantries. You're undermining the structure." Revealed. Kennedy's reply was calm but firm. "Then maybe the structure needs little pressure." The line went dead. The amendment was moving, but resistance was coming, and what neither Kennedy nor AOC knew yet was that the real battle wasn't over climate or jobs or bipartisanship. It was about control. The first sign of real trouble came in the form of a scheduling delay. Kennedy's amendment, now co-sponsored by AOC and two others, was supposed to be reviewed in committee that week, but it was quietly removed from the calendar with no explanation. Just a vague email, "Further evaluation required," inside the Capitol. That phrase usually meant one thing: someone upstairs wasn't happy. Kennedy didn't waste time. He called the committee clerk, who pulled it. The answer was vague, but the message was clear. Leadership on both sides didn't want the amendment gaining momentum. It was too public, too unpredictable, and it didn't follow the script. At the same time, media chatter intensified. Headlines turned skeptical as the Kennedy-AOC alliance falling apart, progress, or posturing old guard, unimpressed by New Deal. Rewrite cable news panels began dissecting the amendment more aggressively. Pundits questioned whether the compromise weakened the urgency of climate reform. Others said it diluted the Green New Deal's vision, and some even accused Kennedy of trying to hijack progressive policy with conservative branding. AOC faced heat too from within her own movement. Online, activists posted side-by-side screenshots of her fiery past speeches and her recent quote about working with Kennedy. Comments flooded in. "She's folding. This isn't the fighter we elected. Why is she cleaning up his mess?" In private, AOC remained steady, but she knew this pressure could grow. Her team floated an idea: back away. Publicly say the amendment was a framework, not a full commitment. Let it fade if the leadership wanted it gone, but she rejected it. "If we back off now," she said, "we prove them right, that this was all for show." Meanwhile, Kennedy's team faced their own crossroads. One aide suggested they hold a press conference, call out the delay, force the media to dig in, but Kennedy shook his head. "We're not going to play their game with their rules. Instead, he made a quieter move. He contacted labor unions, the ones who represented refinery workers, truckers, plant mechanics. He asked them to read the amendment, then he asked them to speak. Within 48 hours, 3 mid-size unions issued public support not for the climate bill as a whole, but for Kennedy's Worker Protection Clause. "We don't agree on everything," one statement read, "but if this amendment is included, we'll know someone was." Listening, that was the shift they needed. Suddenly, lawmakers who had stayed silent began reconsidering. No one wanted to be seen as ignoring labor. Especially not in an election year, AOC's office started fielding new calls to quiet ones from colleagues who had criticized her days earlier. Is it too late to co-sponsor? But the biggest move came from neither party. It came from the people. A town hall in rural Pennsylvania went viral where a man stood up, waved the amendment printout, and said, "I don't care who wrote it. For the first time in years, I feel like someone's fighting for people like me." And just like that, the power shifted again. The amendment was finally back on the committee schedule. It took weeks of quiet maneuvering. Labor union endorsements, quiet co-sponsorships, and pressure from districts that typically didn't care much for climate policy at all, but the ground had shifted, and this time it wasn't just about green energy or party lines. It was about trust. The hearing room was packed again, Reporters' Aids Committee members, all watching to see how it would play out. Some expected fireworks, others expected a quiet rejection. What they didn't expect was what came next after the reading of the amendment. The floor opened for comments. A few senators voiced cautious support. 1 or 2 offered standard criticisms. Then AOC asked to speak. She didn't make a speech. She didn't defend herself. She stood, turned slightly toward Kennedy, and simply said, "This isn't about me or him. It's about people who never get this kind of attention until it's too late. They deserve better. This amendment helps make sure they're not forgotten in the rush to fix what's broken." Then she sat down. No applause, no headlines written. Yet, just that quiet moment again, the kind that makes people rethink what politics is supposed to look like, Kennedy spoke. "Next, I may never agree with the entire plan," he said, "but I'll fight for the people who are forced to live with it, and that means making sure the transition is something they survive, not something they fear." The vote was called. The amendment passed. Committee not unanimously, but with more support than anyone predicted that night. Major networks ran segments on the unexpected alliance. They used words like unlikely, rare, refreshing, but what stuck with most viewers wasn't the politics, it was the humanity. Clips from the original exchange resurfaced: the insult, the silence, the calm response, but now they carried new meaning. What once looked like humiliation now looked like the beginning of something real, and for the first time in a long time. The headlines weren't just about who owned who, they were about who listened. In the weeks that followed, the amendment continued, moving slowly through more reviews and revisions, but it had become part of the larger climate package, and that meant Kennedy's questions had found their answers. Not all of them, not perfectly, but enough to matter. As for AOC and Kennedy, they didn't suddenly become allies. They didn't start appearing side by side or pretending their views had changed, but they had shown something that hit harder than any speech or soundbite: respect, not for each other's politics, but for the people behind them. And that's what made the moment unforgettable. Because one insult on live TV may have started the fire, but what came after, that's what rewrote the story.